Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka Mono Bluetron, back with another review, reaction, discussion video concerning today's Banlist update. For those of you that don't know, Konami of America at about 12 noon today released the April Banlist, just a couple of weeks late. This will be in effect until August, which means it's of particular importance because it's what we're going to be playing under for the North American World Championship qualifier. Now, I had a 10-minute testing plan for tonight, but it used a little card called Ancient Fairy Dragon, so you'll get an apology video tomorrow as well as normal 10-minute testing on Wednesday. I'm going to talk about 4 specific facets of this ban list. First, the actual changes that were made. Second, what it means for design philosophy. Third, how I feel the longest portion of the video so I can get that sick YouTube ad money. And fourth, what I think it means in terms of the upcoming metagame. So firstly, let's get this portion of the video out of the way. Here are the changes. Newly banned, we have Astrograph Sorcerer, Masterpiece the True Draco Slaying King, Phoenexian Cluster Amaryllitis, Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom, Ancient Fairy Dragon, Rank Up Magic Argent Chaos Force, and That Grass Looks Greener. Newly added to the limited list, we have Dynamite Knight the True Draco Fighter, Gem Knight Master Diamond, and Chain Strike. Newly added to the semi-limited list, we have Apoclephor Towers and Ring of Destruction. And finally, unbanned entirely are Atlantean Dragoons, Grandsoil the Elemental Lord, Ignis Heat the True Draco Warrior, Mathematician, Neo-Spatian Grand Mole, and Compulsory Evacuation Device. So the design philosophy portion of this discussion is particularly simplistic this time around. Aside from the Astrograph and Masterpiece hits, obvious hits designed to curb the power level of the 2 top decks, every other hit falls into one of 2 categories. Either a continued note in Konami's book of hardline stances against first-turn kills and particularly uninteractive board states, or a tantamount recognition from Konami that the semi-limited list doesn't actually do anything anymore. Because of the way Yu-Gi-Oh! Works, the searchability and splashability of different engines, the difference between a card being at 1 and 2 or 3 and 2 isn't particularly meaningful. As a result, many of the cards on the semi-limited list are slowly being phased out, and cards like Apoclephor Towers, Dark Hole in the Past, and Ring of Destruction are being added to the semi-limited list as a sort of quarantine test to see if they can exist post-1. So, now that those boring parts of the video are out of the way, let's talk about what's really important. My feelings. Let's start at the top. First, we have Astrograph Sorcerer to 0, and this is a weird one. Not unexpected, but I've been talking to a lot of Pendulum players, and I am of the opinion that the Astrograph Electromite synergy was something we could just sort of all learn to live with, right? Like, there are some things in Yu-Gi-Oh! That are way above the curve, obviously broken, but at the same time are just a part of the game. Things like Scapegoat being a free format, for example. Astrograph Sorcerer looping with Electromite, I thought could be one of those things. Now, putting it to 1 would prevent the obvious, ridiculous degeneracy, that is, make Absolute Dragon, Link Summon, go into Vortex, etc. One of the very big power plays in that strategy. But I understand that this card is still very good. It still provides a lot of advantage for the deck, and I am not particularly sad to see it go. Masterpiece, this is a weird one. I was really hoping that the TCG would continue their commitment to banning this deck in a different way than the OCG, but, you know, here we are. Ask any TD player around the time the deck first came out, Zoo format, I think it was. This card's bad. It is terrible in a lot of matchups. It just ends up being good because it is a big, dumb idiot that resists removal, has a quick effect, and says True Draco in its name. Like, if they can find another one of those, I would expect True Draco to be fine. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that they play something ridiculous like a Metaltron. I wouldn't bet on it. But I think if they find another finisher, the deck might just be fine, and it's possible something like the Monarch's Erupt is just as good of a finisher as Masterpiece ever was. Oh, not Phoenexian Cluster. Oh, next you're going to tell me Blaze Phoenix is banned. Oh, not Rank... This is a weird one. Rank Up Magic Argent Chaos Force is Konami recognizing that the player base is not a bunch of idiots. They will trade the explosive consistency of Pendulum Magicians, now that Astrograph is banned, for just straight up explosiveness in the form of, like, Chronograph looping into Beatrice, into sending an Argent Chaos Force, getting an instant fusion, and then special summoning the Nightingale. I mean, there are FTK lines that can be integrated into the free space now left in Magicians that I think that Konami would prefer people don't integrate. That Grass Looks Greener. Got a lot of feelings about this one. Some of my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh! Was played during the time right after this card was released. I thought some of the decks were super loose, super innovative, and rewarded player skill in-game rather than deck building skill. Engines were like fly-by-night. People were playing like Zoo, Shadal, Invoked, Paleo, all in the same deck with this. I like that 60 card exists. I think it's a really cool, fun deck that rewards players with an expansive knowledge of like the overall card pool of Yu-Gi-Oh! Players who can make snap decisions about which engine to go in on in any given instance. I think that's really cool. However, I think those decks have kind of been moving away from grass anyway. Like, Konami recognized simultaneously that people were willing to play Left Arm Offering to find this card, but also were willing to forego the risk of playing Left Arm Offering entirely to just play like a 59 card stack of pretty good engines, and then one copy of a card that reads, you win the game, you'll draw it in 10% of your hands, right? Like, and I think that's a type of gameplay that they want to pretty clearly move away from. AFD. See ya. I'm not sad to see this go, and I'm a little bitter because it going ruined a video for tonight, but that's fine. I mean, that's fine. You know, I'll just make another one. I'll just spend another couple of hours on a video. AFD is so painfully overpowered. I can't believe it was ever printed in the first place. Obviously, a relic of an age when field spells didn't like do everything you could ever want. If you look at any FTK, it's always the product of like Needle Fiber, Summon Sorceress, Ancient Fairy Dragon, and Firewall, and seeing one of those suckers bite the dust is pretty good. I am happy to see less Destrudo. I'm happy to see less Dragon Ravine, even though Dark Worm is still a thing, and I am happy to never see this sucker again. Dynamite Knight, the true Draco fighter. This is scary. Now, I don't know if any of you have been playing since, 6 months ago when this card was legal, but for those of you that haven't, this is one of the most frightening cards in the game. True King's Return was at 1, for those of you in the future, at a time when this card was banned. It was still playable. This is a card that will search True King's Return, and is much more searchable than TK Return ever was. You can get it off of Dragonic Diagram or Marianne the Maiden. I think that this card being legal, along with Ignis being at 3, is a little frightening for the future of TD, because if they find any reason to include anything like a Monarch engine, any other finisher, you know, suddenly this becomes a problem. Dynamite Knight represents an unbelievable amount of card advantage, the ability to do things on your opponent's turn even when Masterpiece is not in the deck, and just an all-around very powerful first turn target and setup tool. Very concerned. Chain Strike at 1 represents a threat from Konami that the semi-limited list is going to be phased out within the next 2 years. They would not move this thing to 1 if they weren't thinking about getting rid of the semi-limited list for anything other than quarantine purposes while they assess the power level of cards like Apoclephort Towers. Chain Strike would not have been particularly playable at 3. I mean, Chain Burn wasn't poised to take over the meta, but it's a very feels bad way to lose the game to get Chain Struck out of it, so it's probably not a big deal that it's going to 1. Mark my words, though, this will impact the Dragon Duel meta for the semi-limited list. Oh, almost forgot about my favorite old man, Gem Knight Master Diamond. This is odd because I had hoped that Konami would leave this deck alone. I honestly really liked Gem Knight FTK. I'm a big stan for it. I think it rewards very intelligent players, but obviously it's pretty problematic. I will say that Gem Knight FTK did the FTK very rarely. Usually they would do stuff until they got interrupted and then make something like a True King of All Calamities, which is admittedly still very powerful. Putting Master Diamond to 1 makes the actual FTK line way less likely, although not impossible. If you open really, really broken, there are people on Reddit theorizing now very easy ways to continue to play the FTK with 1.5 cards, but unfortunately they all require use of Summon Sorceress, so let's hope that despite it being a promo, it never makes it over here. Semi-limited. Apoclephort Towers did nothing at 1, it'll do nothing at 2. Ring of Destruction is a little frightening, it can't kill anyone anymore, but there are decks like Trickstar that are getting much better and appreciate the incidental burn damage. I will probably be playing 2 copies of this card, and we'll see how it goes. This feels like a dark hole moment, you know, like some cards are put to 2, nothing happens, and they're immediately put to 3. Some cards like Dark Hole are put to 2, are played at 2, and suddenly they're put back to 1. I would not be surprised if that happened to Ring. Atlantean Dragoons wasn't particularly breaking the meta at 2. This will probably not be the spice necessary for Gen X, Mermail, Neptibus, Atlantean, Sekka to become the tier 1 meta deck that we all require it to be on Reddit. Grand Soil, now in line with other Elemental Lords, may he rest in peace. Ignis is... Oh my god, stop doing this. Like, I'm really sweating about TD here. I know Masterpiece is a giant loss for the deck, but, like, this thing is a good card. It draws you a whole lot of cards, and if your finisher is something like the Monarch's Erupt that is particularly unsearchable, hoo boy, drawing more cards is going to be good. More importantly, this thing has the Monarch stat line, so if you start to see a hybrid of those two decks, which is probably going to be my 10-minute testing video for tomorrow, it might be quite good. Mathematician. It's so slow. I mean, it's so... Grand Mole! You can't unban Grand Mole! Oh my god! Grand Mole! Oh! This is probably just hype for the new Neospatian set. Like, I want to believe that Konami finally came to their senses. Like, someone rubbed bath salts under the only guy who understands balance at Konami, and they were like, why is Grand Mole still on the limited list? It's been there since 2001. But, you know, I'm happy to see him off in any capacity. And finally, Compulse. Thanks for the control tool, Konami. It's about 3 years too late. So what do I think this means for the metagame? A lot. Well, first, I think we're moving into a control metagame, which is exciting because we don't get those often. I think the last time we were in a reasonable control metagame was like Paleo format, and really you were only control if you were playing like Paleo or Metal Foe's Demise or something like that. Everything else was just like really linear board building under the guise of control. Like, Dark Law Turbo was not a control deck, ABC was not a control deck, but they had control elements. This is a metagame that's going to have a lot more control elements, very powerful trap cards, very exciting, slender engines paired alongside a ton of hand traps. There were no hand trap hits, there were no scapegoat hits, there weren't really hits to anything slow or grindy at all, just raw, unfettered FTK slaying. And control metas do a lot. They reward players with in-game decision-making skill, they reward players who can deck build well. I mean, they do lose some things. You lose the ability to shine if you're very good at research, at optimization, at rote memorization, at deployment, but effectively, it's Yu-Gi-Oh! Falling in line with how other TCGs measure skill. You know, less of an emphasis on work done outside of the game, and more of an emphasis of the work done inside of the game navigating game states. So what do I think is going to be good? Like, I don't know, Brandish? So Sky Striker is obviously going to be the deck to beat. I think it's probably the most powerful deck heading into Nationals, but of course I'm basing this on the OCG, which is an entirely different metagame. It's possible the deck completely sucks, and the access to really powerful anti-spell card reliant deck tools that we have in the TCG means that they're not going to be nearly as much of a threat as I expect them to be. Having said that, they look scary. Second, I think Trickstar is going to be very powerful. Now, we all thought Trickstar was going to be tier 0 last format, didn't we? Nothing got hit. But they weren't. Trickstar is a deck that lives and dies based on the playability of its counters. Like, if the top deck is a deck that routinely summons guys with over 1800 attack, Trickstar is going to have a terrible time. If it's not, it'll be really good. I don't know what to tell you. Trickstar is a very hard sell, but in general, I think it will be good. Probably a top 3 deck, if not top 2. Altergeist. Altergeist is scary. It's around. Multifaker is a very powerful card, and one of the easiest sells on Altergeist is if something like Brandish becomes tier 1, it is very easy for something like Altergeist to slot cards that beat that deck, Trickstar and True Draco, as well as Pendulum Strategies into the main. Things like Anti-Spell Fragrance, things like Imperial Order fit right at home with the deck. I am excited to see this played more and more. I'm excited to see builds get streamlined according to what's being played outside of Altergeist, and I think it'll be a power player in the upcoming format. Mech Knight Invoked, I think, will be quite good, but Mech Knight Invoked is always quite good. You know, it's just like a pretty solid tier 2 deck that has a lot of game against basically any strategy, doesn't demand a lot out of the pilot, so it's a really good choice for long tournaments. I think there will be a showing at WCQ of Mech Knight Invoked, but I don't think it's a tier 1 deck. 60 card, I don't know. Like, losing Grass isn't that big of a deal for the deck. It was already not playing most of the tools that got at Grass in a lot of other scenarios, and when you think about it, Soul Charge is basically just a boneless Grass anyway. I think this deck is probably still very strong. The addition of really powerful link monsters means it now has a lot of utility and flexibility it didn't before. I think it's just a matter of navigating and understanding which engines are going to be included in the final edition of the list. Like, is it going to be Dino, Zombie, Plant, Lightsworn? Probably, but maybe they'll throw an Invoked or a Brandish engine in there too. Goki is a new addition to the lineup. I think the Goki deck is quite interesting. It's fragile. It's not particularly robust, but it is adept at going off if your opponent is not playing hand traps. Like, if they don't interrupt your plays, it can very easily, utilizing the Nightmares, make an extra link, add an Imperial Order from their deck to the graveyard, and then back to their hand. I mean, there's a lot of things the deck can do, none of which are particularly fair. And I think that it is something you should be watching out for. Noid Lair. I think Lair is a drastically unexplored card. A lot of the reason it's unexplored is because a lot of its natural counters were decks that could very easily outgrind it. If your opponent is playing a control-style deck and only summoning one monster per turn, tributing that monster is pretty good for you. I think that Noid is a very explosive deck that can make the most of a control meta by hedging its explosivity against decks that do things like set 5 pass. I'm very excited to see if Noid can be playable in this upcoming format. The hit of Grass is not nearly as painful as it sounds to this deck, and Diabolos is a heck of a card. And finally, Penjis and TD. Like, I think those decks are still fine. People are going to be, heralding the death of Pendulum and the death of True Draco for the next couple of hours, if that, but I think they're both still very playable. Pendulum may take a new form. It's possible that the Zephyr deck becomes the, best version of the deck. The Zephyr builds right now are a little at odds with themselves. They're kind of schizophrenic. They do things like play the Magician engine and or the Odd Eyes Synchron engine, when now they don't have to do both because most of the Magician engine is just gone anyway. They can play Chronograph as a very easy way to get a Pendulum monster on their side of the field to make Electromite, but not as a lot else. I do think the Zephyr deck is very frightening, and Nui Set 2 is a very formidable board to break. That may be the best version of the deck, or it may be like back to the Pendulum Graphs, let's play Time Pendulum Graph, let's play Star Pendulum Graph, and let's just make rank 4s all day. Like, Pendis is still fine, I think. And then TD. I mean, TD is just so scary. Like, there's so many different routes this deck can take. Like, does it become a control deck that plays Demise, Awados, and, like, sits on a Dynamite Knight? Does it become a deck with a small Monarch engine that plays, like, Monarchs Erupt and maybe a Pantheism, goes into Domain occasionally? There's just a lot of really crazy avenues, and they've opened up a lot of utility by unbanning a lot of the cards that draw a lot of cards. So, we'll see. And then finally, there's like a bunch of decks like at the mid-tier 2 level that I think are probably still completely fine, totally playable. ABC, Foes, Burning Abyss, Spies, I mean, there's a lot of them. Foes specifically could integrate True Draco, become the deck that it was for exactly one tournament last year. It certainly gets a boost in playability because Masterpiece wasn't doing a whole lot for that deck, but all of those options are still probably fine. And then World Chalice, I think, is going to be the new FTK of choice. Like, if I had to isolate a deck that does things that Konami doesn't like, I guess right now it would be World Chalice. So that's that. That's all I've got to say. Thank you for coming by, giving me YouTube ad money, and listening to my incoherent rambles about the upcoming format. All in all, I'm very happy that we have it now and not the week before Nats, so I can go out and buy Ash Blossoms without fear that they're going to be semi-limited like the weird people who run the OCG did. Bye.